Commander Zira stood on the rocky hill overlooking the battlefield of Nexus Prime. Her red armor gleamed under the two suns that hung in the purple sky. The metal plates had saved her life more times than she could count. Each scratch and dent told a story of victory. She was a Caloth warrior, one of the finest in the Empire. Her people had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were tall, strong, and built for war. Their gray skin was tough like armor, and their yellow eyes could see enemies from great distances. Zira had been fighting since she was 12 years old. Now, at 30, she had conquered 17 worlds for her empire. The battlefield below was chaos. Smoke rose from burning vehicles. The ground was covered with craters from plasma bombs. Bodies of fallen soldiers lay scattered across the red dirt. The air smelled of burned metal and fear. On one side were the forces of the Caloth Empire. Thousands of gray-skinned warriors in perfect formation. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Their armor was polished and strong. They moved like one giant machine, following orders without question. On the other side was the resistance. A mix of different alien species who refused to bow to the Empire. There were the blue-skinned Centauri with their crystal weapons. The insect-like Vrex with their quick movements. The rock-hard Titans who could punch through steel. They fought bravely, but they were losing. Zira had seen this many times before. The resistance always started strong, but the Empire always won. It was simple math. Better weapons, better training, better discipline. The outcome was never in doubt. She raised her hand, ready to signal the final attack. Her forces would charge down the hill and crush what remained of the enemy. By sunset, another world would belong to the Empire. Then everything changed. A figure walked out of the smoke at the edge of the battlefield. At first, Zira thought it might be another Centauri or perhaps a lost civilian. But as the figure came closer, she realized this was something different. Something she had never seen before. It was a human. Zira had heard reports about humans, but she had never seen one in person. They were supposed to be a new species, barely capable of space travel. The intelligence reports said they were weak, primitive, and not worth worrying about. Their home planet was far away in a quiet corner of the galaxy. But this human did not look weak. He was shorter than most species in the galaxy, but he moved with confidence. His skin was tan from many suns, and his hair was dark brown. His equipment was basic compared to Empire technology. His armor looked like it had been repaired many times with different pieces. His weapon was simple, almost ancient by galactic standards. Yet something about him made Zira pause. The human walked across the battlefield like he was taking a walk in a peaceful garden. Plasma bolts flew around him, but he did not run or hide. He stepped over fallen soldiers with respect, stopping briefly to check if any were still alive. When he found wounded fighters, he called out in different languages, directing medical teams to their locations. This puzzled Zira. In Empire doctrine, you ignored the wounded until after victory. Resources were not wasted on those who could not fight. But this human seemed to think every life mattered, even in the middle of battle. The human carried a small communication device. As he walked, he spoke into it in calm, clear tones. Zira could not understand the words, but she recognized the tone. It was the voice of someone taking command. The effect was immediate and impossible. The scattered resistance forces began to move differently. Instead of fighting as separate groups, they started working together. The Centauri began covering the slower Titans. The quick Vrex started carrying messages between different units. The chaos became coordination. Zira had studied warfare for 18 years. She knew every tactic, every strategy, every trick that had ever worked. But she had never seen anything like this. The human was not giving detailed orders. He was not threatening punishment for failure. He was simply talking to people like they mattered. And they responded. A group of Centauri had been pinned down behind a destroyed vehicle. They were out of ammunition and surrounded by Empire forces. According to all military logic, they should surrender or die. But the human walked straight toward them through the crossfire. Zira watched through her scope as Empire soldiers fired at the approaching figure. The human moved in ways that should not have worked. He rolled behind cover that was too small, jumped over obstacles that were too high, and somehow reached the trapped Centauri without being hit. What happened next made no sense. Instead of ordering the Centauri to fight to the death, the human started looking around the battlefield like he was shopping for supplies. He pointed to a broken hover tank, some scattered metal beams, and a pile of energy cells that had fallen from a supply truck. Within minutes, the Centauri were building something. Not a weapon or a fortress, but some kind of mobile shield. They used the metal beams as a frame, the energy cells as power, and pieces of the tank as protection. When they were done, they had created a moving barrier that could protect them as they retreated to better positions. It was brilliant. It was simple. And it was completely against everything Zira had been taught about war. Empire doctrine was clear: use overwhelming force to destroy the enemy quickly. Do not waste time on creative solutions. Do not risk valuable equipment on uncertain plans. Follow the strategy that has worked for 3,000 years. But this human seemed to think that rules were just suggestions. More impossible things happened. A unit of Vrex had lost their commander and were confused about their orders. The human spent 30 seconds talking to them, and suddenly they knew exactly what to do. A group of Titans were advancing into an obvious trap, but a few words from the human made them stop and find a better path. It was not just tactics. The human seemed to understand something about each species that even they did not know about themselves. He knew that Centauri fought better when they had time to think. He knew that Vrex needed clear, simple goals. He knew that Titans were stronger when they felt like they were protecting someone. Zira felt something she had never experienced before: doubt. The Empire had conquered the galaxy because they were stronger, smarter, and more disciplined than everyone else. That was a fact. It had been proven on 1,000 worlds. But watching this primitive human coordinate forces that should have been defeated hours ago made her question everything she believed. Her communication device crackled to life. Commander Zira, request permission to begin final assault. She looked down at the battlefield. Her forces were still in perfect formation. They still had superior numbers and firepower. They could still win this battle easily. But something had changed. The resistance was no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting with purpose. And at the center of it all was one human who had turned certain defeat into something else entirely. Zira had frozen the moment she saw him enter the battlefield. Not from fear, but from recognition. She was looking at something the Empire had never encountered before, someone who fought not just for victory, but for something bigger. She realized that the intelligence reports had been wrong about humans. They were not weak or primitive. They were something much more dangerous. They were hope. Commander. The voice on the communication device was waiting for orders. Zira looked at the human one more time. He was helping a wounded Titan to safety while directing 3 different species in a counterattack that should not have been possible. He moved like someone who had never heard of the word impossible. For the first time in her career, Commander Zira hesitated to give the order to attack. The battle was about to change in ways she could never imagine. Zira finally gave the order, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Begin the assault, but proceed with caution. The Empire forces moved down the hill in perfect formation. Their plasma rifles charged with deadly energy. Their boots hit the ground in rhythm like thunder. This should have been the end of the battle. But the human was ready. As the Empire soldiers advanced, something strange happened. The resistance did not scatter in panic as they always did. Instead, they moved to positions that made no tactical sense. Centauri fighters took cover behind rocks that were too small. Vrex soldiers spread out in patterns that left gaps in their defense. Titan warriors moved to locations that seemed completely wrong. Zira watched through her scope as the first Empire units reached the battle zone. They aimed at the obvious targets, but the resistance fighters were no longer there. Somehow, they had moved to new positions at exactly the right moment. It was like they knew where every shot would be fired before the triggers were pulled. The human was coordinating this impossible dance through his small communication device. His voice remained calm and steady, even as explosions erupted around him. He spoke to each species in their own language, giving instructions that sounded more like suggestions than orders. "Blue team, when you see the flash, move 3 steps left," he said to a group of Centauri. "Fast friends, count to 5 then run to the shiny rocks," he told the Vrex in their simple speech patterns. "Strong ones, wait for my signal, then push the broken metal toward the hill," he instructed the Titans. None of it should have worked. Military coordination required precise timing, detailed planning, and strict discipline. This human was treating warfare like a game that everyone could play. But it was working. The Empire's first wave found themselves shooting at empty positions while the real targets appeared behind them. Centauri crystal weapons fired from unexpected angles. Vrex fighters moved too fast to track. Titans threw massive pieces of debris that created new cover for their allies. General Corax, Zira's second-in-command, appeared beside her. His yellow eyes were confused and angry. "Commander, the humans are using some kind of advanced tactical computer. Our movements are being predicted with impossible accuracy." Zira shook her head. Through her scope, she could see the human clearly. He was not looking at any computer or advanced device. He was watching the battle with his own eyes, listening to reports through his basic communication equipment, and making decisions faster than any computer could calculate. "No," she said quietly. "He is doing this himself." "That's impossible," Corax insisted. "No single mind can track this many variables in real time." But Zira was beginning to understand something that changed everything. The human was not trying to control every detail of the battle. He was trusting each species to do what they did best, while helping them work together in ways they had never tried before. The Empire way was different. Every soldier followed orders exactly. Every movement was planned in advance. Every decision came from the top of the command structure. It was efficient and predictable. The human way was chaos that somehow became order. A new report came through her communication device. "Commander, we've lost contact with Alpha Squad. They were advancing on the left flank and then just vanished." Zira shifted her scope to the left side of the battlefield. She found Alpha Squad quickly enough. They were alive but surrounded by a mixed group of resistance fighters who had appeared from nowhere. The Empire soldiers had their weapons ready, but they were not firing. Something was happening that Zira had never seen before. The human had reached the surrounded squad and was talking to them. He was talking to Empire soldiers. In the middle of a battle. Without any weapons pointed at them. Through her enhanced hearing equipment, Zira could pick up pieces of the conversation. The human spoke in the Empire's language, though his accent was strange. "Your orders are to advance and destroy, right?" he asked the squad leader. The Empire sergeant nodded stiffly. "We follow the commands of the Empire. But your real job is to go home alive to your families," the human continued. "Same as everyone else here." This was wrong on so many levels. Empire soldiers did not discuss family during battle. They did not question their orders. They certainly did not have philosophical conversations with the enemy. But the human kept talking. "Look around you. This battle isn't going to end the war. Win or lose today, there will be another battle tomorrow, and another one next week. The only thing that changes is how many people don't go home." The Empire sergeant was listening. So were his soldiers. This was against every rule of military discipline, but they were listening. "I'm offering you a choice," the human said. You can fight us and probably die, because my friends here are really good at what they do. Or you can walk away from this battlefield and tell your commanders that you encountered overwhelming resistance. That would be desertion, the sergeant replied, but his voice was uncertain. No, the human said gently. That would be survival. There's a difference. Zira watched in amazement as the Empire squad looked at each other. These were trained soldiers who had never questioned orders in their lives. But something about the human's words was making them think. The sergeant made his decision. Squad, we are withdrawing due to overwhelming enemy resistance. They walked away. Not running in fear, not retreating in defeat, but walking away like they had chosen to leave. The resistance fighters let them go without firing a single shot. General Korax was furious. This is impossible. They're deserting. We must punish them immediately. With what charges? Zira asked. They followed proper procedure for tactical withdrawal when facing superior forces. But she knew that was not the real issue. The human had done something that struck at the heart of everything the Empire believed. He had reminded soldiers that they were people first and warriors second. The battle continued, but it was unlike any battle Zira had ever seen. More Empire squads found themselves surrounded by resistance forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. Each time, the human would arrive and start talking. Not threatening or demanding, just talking like these were all people who happened to be in the same difficult situation. Some Empire soldiers chose to fight. Those battles were quick and decisive, with the resistance forces using tactics that seemed impossible. They moved like they could read minds, always in the right place at the right time. Other Empire soldiers chose to withdraw. They were allowed to leave without being harmed, though many looked confused about why they had been given that choice. The human was changing the rules of warfare simply by treating everyone like they mattered. Zira realized that this was what made humans dangerous. Not their technology or their strength or their numbers. It was their ability to make other people believe that there might be a better way to solve problems than fighting. Commander, came another voice through her communication device. Request orders. Our advance units are reporting successful withdrawal from superior enemy positions. Successful withdrawal was military language for, we chose not to fight. It was technically correct, but everyone knew what it really meant. The Empire was not losing this battle through defeat. They were losing it through choice. Zira stood up and checked her personal weapons. Her plasma rifle was fully charged. Her armor systems were running perfectly. Her tactical computer showed the optimal path to reach the human who was causing all this chaos. Where are you going, Commander? General Korax asked. To end this, she replied. If one human can change the course of this battle, then removing that human should restore normal conditions. Shall I send a squad with you? Zira shook her head. No. This requires a personal approach. She began walking down the hill toward the center of the battlefield. As she moved, she thought about everything she had seen. The human had turned a certain Empire victory into something else entirely. Not through superior firepower or clever tactics, but by making people remember that they had choices. The Empire had conquered the galaxy by making people forget they had choices. By making surrender seem like the only logical option. By making resistance feel hopeless. But this human had reminded everyone that hope was still possible. As Zira reached the edge of the main battle area, she could see the human clearly. He was helping a wounded Centauri while simultaneously directing a complex maneuver that involved all three resistance species working together. He looked up and saw her approaching. Their eyes met across the battlefield. He smiled. Not the smile of someone who was winning, or the smile of someone who was confident of victory. It was the smile of someone who was genuinely happy to meet another person, even in the middle of a war. Zira felt something change inside her chest. For the first time in her life, she was walking toward an enemy who did not seem to consider her an enemy. The final confrontation was about to begin, but it would not be anything like what either of them expected. Zira walked toward the human with her weapon ready but not raised. Around them, the battle had changed into something she had never seen before. Small groups of soldiers from both sides were talking instead of shooting. Some Empire units were withdrawing peacefully while others had chosen to join the mixed defense positions. The human waited for her approach. He did not call for backup or prepare for combat. He simply stood there, checking on wounded fighters and continuing to coordinate the impossible cooperation happening around him. When Zira was 20 steps away, she stopped and raised her plasma rifle. "I am Commander Zira of the Caliph Empire. Surrender now and this battle ends." The human looked at her weapon, then back at her face. "I'm Tom," he said simply. "And I don't think you really want this battle to end the way it always has before." His casual use of his name surprised her. Empire protocol required formal titles and rank identification. But Tom spoke like they were meeting in a marketplace instead of a battlefield. "You are disrupting the natural order," Zira said. "The Empire brings peace through strength. Your resistance only causes more suffering." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "I've heard that argument before. But tell me something, Commander Zira. In all your victories, in all the worlds you've conquered, how many people actually became happier?" The question was absurd. Happiness was not a military objective. "The Empire provides order, security, and prosperity," she replied with the standard response. "For who?" Tom asked. "For the people whose worlds you conquered. Or for the Empire?" Zira found herself thinking about the planets she had helped subjugate. She remembered the faces of defeated leaders, the silent crowds watching Empire flags being raised over their cities. She had never considered whether those people were grateful for their conquest. "Order benefits everyone," she said, though the words felt less certain than usual. Tom gestured to the battlefield around them. "Look at what's happening here. Centauri, Vrex, Titans, and humans working together. No one is forcing them to cooperate. No one is threatening them with punishment. They're choosing to help each other because it feels right." Zira looked around and saw something that challenged everything she understood about different species. The Centauri were known for being slow and methodical. But working with the quick-thinking Vrex, they had become faster and more decisive. The Vrex usually fought in chaotic swarms, but guided by Centauri planning, they had become more effective. The Titans normally worked alone, but protecting the smaller species had given them a purpose that made them stronger. "This cooperation is temporary," Zira argued. "When the crisis ends, they will return to their old conflicts." "Maybe," Tom admitted. "But maybe they'll remember that working together felt better than fighting alone." A Centauri medic approached them carrying supplies for wounded soldiers. She moved carefully between Empire and Resistance fighters, treating anyone who needed help regardless of which side they had been fighting for. "Stop," Zira commanded. "You cannot treat Empire soldiers. They are your enemies." The Centauri medic looked confused. "But they are hurt," she said in her musical language. "Hurt people need help." Tom translated the exchange, then added, "She doesn't see enemies, Commander. She sees people who are in pain." Zira watched as the medic began treating a wounded Empire soldier who had been left behind during one of the withdrawals. The soldier was initially suspicious, but as his pain decreased, his expression changed to surprise and then something that looked like gratitude. "This is against military protocol," Zira said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Whose protocol?" Tom asked gently. "The Empire's protocol that says some people matter less than others. Or the protocol that says healing is more important than hatred." A young Vrex fighter approached them, moving in the quick, nervous way of his species. He spoke rapidly in clicking sounds that Zira could not understand. Tom listened and smiled. "He says his squad found some Empire soldiers who are lost and running low on water. He wants to know if we can share our supplies with them." "You cannot supply enemy forces," Zira protested. "Why not?" Tom asked. "They're thirsty. We have water. Seems like a simple problem with a simple solution. The Vrex fighter tilted his insectoid head, clearly confused by the concept that thirsty people should not be given water. Zira realized that she could not explain Empire logic to these species because their thinking was fundamentally different. They saw problems and tried to solve them in the most direct way possible. The Empire saw problems and asked how they could be used to gain advantage. You are undermining military discipline, she said, but she was no longer pointing her weapon at Tom. I'm reminding people that they have choices, he replied. The Empire teaches that there is only one way to solve problems, through force. But humans believe that force should be the last option, not the first one. A group of Titan warriors approached, carrying building materials they had salvaged from the battlefield. They were constructing temporary shelters for wounded soldiers from both sides. The massive stone-like beings worked with surprising gentleness, careful not to disturb anyone who was resting or receiving medical treatment. In Empire doctrine, we do not waste resources on enemy wounded, Zira said. One of the Titans heard her and responded in his deep, slow voice. Tom translated, he says that once someone is wounded, they are no longer a warrior. They are just a person who needs help. Zira had spent her entire life learning to think like an Empire commander. She had been taught to see every situation in terms of advantage and disadvantage, victory and defeat, us and them. But watching these different species work together was showing her a completely different way of understanding the world. Your methods are inefficient, she said, though she was no longer sure she believed it. Tom sat down on a piece of broken concrete, apparently unconcerned that an armed enemy commander was standing nearby. Maybe. But efficiency isn't the only thing that matters. Sometimes the slow way is the better way. The slow way gets people killed, Zira replied with standard Empire reasoning. And the fast way gets entire civilizations destroyed, Tom said quietly. How many species has the Empire wiped out in the name of efficiency? Zira did not answer because she knew the number. She had helped calculate it during her strategic training. 43 species had been completely eliminated because they could not be efficiently integrated into the Empire. They were incompatible with galactic civilization, she said, repeating the official explanation. Or maybe they just wanted to live differently, Tom suggested. Maybe they had ideas about how society should work that the Empire didn't want to hear. More soldiers from both sides were gathering in the area, but they were not preparing for combat. They were sharing food, water, and medical supplies. Some were just talking, using translation devices or simple gestures to communicate. Zira watched an Empire corporal teaching a young Vrex how to repair a damaged communication device. The Vrex was showing the corporal how to move more quietly across broken ground. They were learning from each other like the war had never happened. This cannot last, Zira said. When my reinforcements arrive, this cooperation will end. Will it? Tom asked. Or will your reinforcements see what's happening here and start asking the same questions you're asking? Zira realized that Tom was right to be confident. The sight of former enemies working together was powerful. It made the whole concept of permanent warfare seem unnecessary and wasteful. Her communication device activated. Commander Zira, this is Fleet Command. What is your status? She looked around the battlefield one more time. Empire soldiers were helping to build shelters. Resistance fighters were sharing their medical supplies. Species that had been fighting each other for decades were cooperating like they had always been allies. Fleet Command, she said slowly. I am requesting a temporary ceasefire to allow for proper treatment of wounded personnel. Denied, came the immediate response. Complete your mission and destroy all resistance forces. Zira looked at Tom, who was listening to her conversation with interest but no apparent concern. She looked at the mixed groups of soldiers who were treating each other with respect and kindness. She thought about all the world she had conquered and all the people who had never been given a choice about their future. For the first time in her life, Commander Zira made a decision that went against Empire orders. Fleet Command, she said clearly. I am declaring this battle over. All Empire forces are withdrawing to establish a neutral zone for peace negotiations. The silence on the communication channel lasted for several seconds. Then, Commander, you are in direct violation of orders. Explain yourself immediately. Zira removed her helmet and let her long gray hair fall free. The gesture was symbolic among her people, indicating that she was speaking as an individual rather than as a representative of the Empire. I am explaining that I have found a better way, she said. And I think it's time for the Empire to learn about it. She ended the communication and looked at Tom, who was smiling again. So what happens now? She asked. Tom stood up and extended his hand to her in the human gesture of friendship. Now we start building something new. Together. Zira reached out and took his hand. Around them, soldiers from both sides stopped their activities to watch this moment. They understood that something important was happening, even if they could not yet imagine what it would lead to. The war was not ending, but it was changing. And for the first time in galactic history, that change was being driven not by conquest or defeat, but by the radical idea that different people could choose to work together. The human had entered the battlefield and changed everything, not through superior force, but through something much more powerful, hope. And hope, Zira was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous weapon in the universe.